It's the Locked On Flyers podcast for Monday, May 20th. Your daily dose of Flyers news, analysis, and high quality content that always loves a good rumor, Russ.
Yeah, there's a few.
You're Locked On Flyers, your daily podcast on the Philadelphia Flyers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, and thanks for making Locked On Flyers your first listen every day. I am Rachel Donner. You can find me on Twitter at rmiriam. I'm here as always with Russ Cohen, who's on all your favorite social media apps at Sportsology. We are at Locked On Flyers on Twitter, Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky as well. You can find our show over on YouTube or on the SiriusXM app or anywhere you listen to podcasts. Subscribe to get our latest episode as soon as it's available here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Russ, we are going to get into our sort of prospects and two-way contract guys and figure out what we should be doing with them next season. We've got a new weekly poll question and our Nemesis of the week. But the first thing we have to talk about, obviously, are these Matvei Michkov updates / rumors out there. That he is potentially going to terminate his KHL contract and come over here.
Well, I didn't take it as he's terminating it. I took it as they're going to loan him like to the Flyers. They're just going to let him go and let the contract run out. But to do that, there's obviously terms that are going to have to be met. Things that if we talk about it, we'll get in trouble, and things that you could talk about in public. But we also have to consider that, those terms are going to be the devil in the details for Danny Briere, because again, it sounds good and it is good that if he comes over, great. But fans have to understand he's a developing prospect. He's not ready. It's not like he's coming over as a complete prospect, because if he was a complete player, they'd want him there this year. I mean,
right.
The big team doesn't want him for a reason. People, do need to acknowledge that. Now, for those same reasons, you have a coach here that is now going to have to bend over backwards to make sure he learns the finer things of the game and really, puts out the right carpet for him. No pun intended on that one. But you know what I'm saying? Like that would be the number one thing now. And honestly, other than Zamula, he hasn't really been wanting to do that. And now they're going to be at the point where he is going to have to do that.
Yeah, I think that's the issue for me here is there going to be a condition on the loan that he's going to have to play at the NHL level when clearly he is not ready? If he can't play KHL hockey, he can't play NHL hockey. That's just like it's an easy assumption to make. And I think that he would.
But if you want him over here, you're going to have to just teach him here. That's the whole thing. That's basically what they're saying.
Right. So I just don't see, like, if the big club in the KHL doesn't want him yet, why not loan him again? Like, I just don't understand why they're.
Because Michkov may not want to go to Sochi. He may not be thrilled about that.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't know, but I'm just guessing.
Right. And it's interesting because, normally in KHL circles, it's the clubs that have all the power.
Right.
And so for an individual player to have any say in this seems a little off to me.
Well, I think he'll have say in it if they get terms that they like. So that's why they're sort of checking out what could they get from Michkov. Like that's really what the thing is here, for lack of a better term. And so they're trying to see what they could get for him. And it's fine because the Flyers are a developing team. They shouldn't be that worried if they get a player that's not completely ready. I don't think that's the end of the world. You just have to have a coach that's going to be willing to deal with that, because you can't just play him 8 minutes a night. Because again, it's like this. There's going to be conditions in this contract that are going to have to be met. And that's going to be the thing about it. So in other words, he's going to have to play in the NHL. We're pretty sure that's going to be in there, right?
Right.
And I'm sure there is something in there that he's going to have to play, more than 8 minutes a game. I'm sure, because otherwise that'll be what happens, is that he's going to play 8 minutes. You know what I mean? So they're going to be pretty cagey, I think, about these terms. And I understand, like, fans are excited, which is good. You should be excited. Then I see these other fans like, well, and we'll talk about Kolosov. Well, why don't these players earn it? Why don't they? They don't have to earn it. That's the whole point. When you draft one, this is all that comes with it, and they don't have to earn anything. They play over there because they want to play over there. They make money. They're playing in front of their friends and family, and then when they feel like it, they come over. There are some that go to the AHL, but it's not a large percentage, and generally the higher marquee guys don't. So that's where, this is the lay of the land. That's it. It doesn't matter what other players do or what you think they should do.
Right, and that's the risk, right? And when they picked Michkov, we talked about all the risks
Oh,
that
yeah.
came into play. Danny Briere talked about it, that
Mhm.
there were no guarantees, but they felt like it was worth the risk because he was such a high-end talent. This is part of that risk coming
Right.
into play right now with conditions, with requirements for level of play. And even if it would make the most sense for him to play in the AHL over here, that may not be. And this is related to the conversation we're going to have next segment about the prospect forwards here. But it's also related to the conversation we had a week ago on the Monday show last week, where we talked about the cap and what roster spots there was room for. And there was 2 roster spots open for either 2 defensemen if they went with 8D, or 1 forward and 1 defenseman
Right.
if they went with 7 defensemen on the roster. If that one spot is Matvei Michkov, well, that's it. We're done. We're done here.
Right.
So
Unless there's a trade made or
unless there's a
something.
trade or a buyout that
Right.
happens, right? So
Mhm.
I think it almost guarantees the Atkinson buyout if Michkov
It
comes
does.
over.
Yeah, it does, because then they'll do something. So, yeah, I
Yeah.
believe that would be a part of it. So, yeah, I mean, the Flyers would get better, but there would be parts that would have to, would be a work in progress. There's just no way around it. I know everybody thinks the power play would get instantly better. You would think it should. But again, he's got to learn how to communicate with everybody. Like, we don't know what his level of English is. It wasn't great at the draft. It was not, marginal. So he's going to have to take lessons. He's going to have to communicate with guys like that.
Yeah.
All these
And
things take
that's
time.
right. And that's another thing that time in the AHL does. It builds
Yes.
those communication skills and the language barrier. And like Zamula played in North America,
Mm-hmm.
and had plenty of time to develop skills. So I think like it is a very interesting problem to have for the Flyers right now. We'll
Yeah.
figure out what happens officially and keep talking about it. But the other guy in this conversation is goaltender Alexsei Kolosov, right? So we know he didn't get to play in the playoffs, and
So we have to believe
there,
now that he wanted to.
right, and that there is a rumor that he wants to go back to the KHL, like there'll be ships passing in the night.
Mm-hmm.
And because he didn't get to play in the playoffs, and or because of the Fedotov contract, he feels like there's a roadblock in the way of him potentially getting NHL time. And that goes back to what we just talked about with Michkov, that guys don't come over from the KHL unless they're going to get NHL playing time. And maybe Kolosov, at the time he signed that ELC and burned the year because of the loan rules, Fedotov was out of the picture at that
Correct.
point.
And this is the
So,
complication. So, and he
yeah,
hasn't said that. And I understand why the Flyers are like, hey, we don't know anything about it, because you're hoping to change the kid's mind. He is, he's 21
right.
years old. But again, there probably isn't a lot of Russian infrastructure in Lehigh for him to feel good. I don't know if there's a Russian neighborhood in Lehigh. You know what I mean? Like, these things matter when you bring
Yeah.
over a player like that, or 2 players like that. But, one of them
Yeah.
won't see Lehigh. So that does matter. And I don't know if that's all set up. I doubt it is.
Well, and the big difference here, though, is that because Kolosov is under contract with the Flyers organization, the Flyers would have to officially loan him back over there.
Sure. But again, so I know, and I've seen some people sort of write like, well, the Flyers will decide what to do. Sure, they could decide what to do. That's fine. But if you piss this kid off, it's just there's no advantage for the Flyers to play
Right.
hardball here. There's zero advantage.
Exactly, and, like, that's kinda where I was going with it. So, it's like, are the Flyers gonna be the bad guy in either of these situations? They can't. They just
No.
can't afford it. So, whatever Michkov and his people want, whatever Kolosov and his people want, that is what is going to happen, and the Flyers have no say, are gonna
But
have to react.
we do have to point out, because we pointed it out on the show, that giving Fedotov the kind of contract you gave him does signal to a young Russian goalie like that, like, hey, they already have Urson. It looks like he's the number one. They got Fedotov locked up now for a couple of years. He's the number two. I don't want to spend 2 years in Lehigh. Like, I
Yeah,
guarantee you that's his thought process. And in that regard, because he could start in the KHL. So, that's where the crux of this, I think, lies. And so, again, that's why everything you do has consequences in hockey, like contract wise, team wise, player wise. It's
yeah,
not always said out in public. Teams and players don't always want to tell you that, hey, this is why this happened. And that's fine. That's their prerogative. But you just have to picture yourself, if you're in that job and you came over and you're a starting goalie somewhere else, are you going to wait for 2 years to just be the backup? Because he doesn't know that
yeah.
Urson's not going to be the
Or, like,
starter.
hope for an injury to
Right.
get your shot. Like,
Right.
that's ludicrous.
Right.
So,
So you have to,
I
look at
yeah.
it in those terms. And so that's why I think this all has come up. And maybe it's not under official channels, but somebody heard it somewhere or somebody made it up. But either way, I think there's something to it.
Yeah, I think so too. Stay tuned, kids. It's about to get complicated. Meanwhile, like I said, Michkov coming over could affect the forward prospects in Lehigh, and so we're going to just do a quick rundown of everybody that's an ELC or a two-way contract down there, and see what their goals should be for next season. We're going to do that coming up next. We all know how important life insurance is, but it can be overwhelming trying to find the right policy on your own. Policygenius is the country's leading online insurance marketplace. It saves you time and money so you can provide your family with a financial safety net starting today. With Policygenius, you can find life insurance policies that start at just $292 per year for $1 million of coverage. Some options offer same day approval and avoid unnecessary medical exams. And I know it feels so much better to have insurance and not have to worry about family being covered. Your work life insurance policy may not offer enough protection for your family's needs. And even worse, it may not come with you if you leave your job. Policy Genius gives you unbiased advice from licensed experts on their support team. Check life insurance off your to-do list in no time with Policy Genius. Head to policygenius.com/lockedonnhl or click the link in the description to give your free life insurance quotes a shot and see how much you could save. That's policygenius.com/lockedonnhl. We will be answering mailbag questions on Wednesday as usual, so make sure to get those in. You can email us at lockedonflyers@gmail. You can send us a message on Twitter or comment over on YouTube. So, yeah, there's potentially one spot for a forward, and I don't think that Michkov coming over should affect it, but it will. Nonetheless, we have 9 forwards already under contract for next season, whether they're on a two-way deal or an ELC. And I think it's important to kind of take stock of them and kind of what their roles should be and their goals for next season. So I would say that you know the biggest question mark here is Elliot Denoyer
Hmm.
because he just had such a horrible season. Like, is this upcoming season like it's do or die for him, right?
It's do or die. He's got to prove himself. Uh, there's nothing wrong with someone being a lifetime Phantom, but then it's up to the team to just sign him to an AHL only deal. We don't know if Denoyer is going to want to do that. And we don't know if that's where he's at, right? So he may just
Right.
ride out, his contract with the Flyers at that point and then do, try and sign somewhere else. But this is a do it or die year. But there is something important to point out before all these guys even get looked at. If Matvei Michkov comes over, I would tell you 75% the Flyers are signing a Russian forward to play with them. And if they do, there's not even going to be a spot. And I would say there's a good likelihood that they might do that. So you have to keep that as part of the equation too, like a veteran who could speak to him, who could really help him along.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I think the other, like the next sort of tier of guys that we got to talk about is Ollie Lixel, who had NHL time this year, J.R. Avon, and Samu Tuomala, because those, like Ollie Lixel, in theory, should get that forward spot if Michkov
Yes.
wasn't a factor, right? Given the time and how he played, I think it's his to lose. But J.R. Avon and Samu Tuomala, I know Tuomala was injured at the tail end of the season, but Tuomala had a rough year too. That was started out really, really strong and kind of trailed off. J.R. Avon had his ups and downs over the season. Those two should be battling to get call-ups next year.
Yeah, I mean, Tuomala should be, the best goal scorer on Lehigh. If he doesn't get to that point, he's probably not going to be in the NHL anytime soon. Lixel got to be the top point guy there. If he's not going to get called up. It's just that simple. And they still might not get called up unless there's injuries, right? Which there usually are. So I think that's where those guys are at. They really, Lixel is the one they could run into trouble with because, and I'm not saying he's going to turn into the next Marsh or so, but if they don't retain him, let's say, because they're just like, yeah, he's not really working out for us, in a couple of years, if he figures out a few things because he's really got a lot of tools, that's where you worry about him becoming that somewhere else. But, that's down the line.
Yeah, it's it is going to be a really difficult year, I think, for Tuomala, especially, and having to achieve a lot. Now, sort of the other question mark here, because we didn't get to see him play, was Massimo Rizzo. And he should be one of the top guys on the Phantoms this upcoming season.
Yeah.
But there's a big question mark as to where he's going to fit on this team and how they're going to integrate him and how they're going to use him. So, I think expectations should be high, but not sky high.
Right. But he has to be a top 6 guy. You're not putting him on the third line in the AHL. You shouldn't be doing that. We're never going to know about him not playing in the playoffs. I'm going to assume it's probably a lot like Kolosov, though. Maybe they just didn't want to put him in. Until I'm told otherwise, it's hard to assume anything else. But the player's not going to say anything. So we're not really going to find that out. But next year, you got to make him a top 6 guy. And you got to give him, at least one veteran and leave them alone for 20, 25 games. That's not Lappy's way, but he's got to do it because this guy could really develop into something, but not if he's bouncing around. And he's got to get power play time. He's really good. He's got to get top power play time. These other veterans, whatever, some are going to be on the second power play. Some might not be there. That's the way you got to do it because the Flyers can't only develop like one player a year or 2 players a year. They're further away than that. And even getting Michkov, they're further away than that. You have to develop 3 or 4 players in one of these seasons to kind of get that going for 2 years from now, if that's still your goal. So, that's the way they have to look at it.
Right. Now, the other guys, there's one I would call true AHLer on this list that's like an emergency call-up situation, and that's Rhett Gardner. So I feel like we know what his role is, and that, so we don't really have to talk about him.
No.
But there are 3 other guys here on this list. So the first one I want to talk about is Alexis Gendron, because as we recall, he was loaned back to the Q. He's going to play in the Memorial Cup. We talked about that last week. And I think that next year he has to return to the Phantoms and prove that he should stay there for this full upcoming season.
Yeah, he's got to be a top 6 guy, top 3-point guy. Like that's what he has to be if he's ever going to make the NHL. Because these are great numbers for juniors, and he might do well in the Memorial Cup. Probably will. But the idea is for him, he's not the biggest guy. He's got to, really, really prove it. similar to what Brink has to do. And Brink, when he was with the Phantoms, was always one of those top guys. So now Gendron has to do that too.
Yeah, and then, of course, we have Zayd Wisdom, who I think, again, he struggled to get ice time this year. We thought maybe 2 years ago that he had a shot of maybe being a top guy on the Phantoms and maybe getting some call-up opportunities around now, right? Which is what we thought then, but it has not panned out that way. He struggled scoring-wise. He struggled to be effective all season long, and I really feel like he's gonna be an AHL career guy, kind of level player at this point, but he would have to really step up and I think become a specialty player in order to make it work.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I think that's not far off from what they thought he might be when they drafted him. So I think you got to give him a role. I hope they gave him some good marching orders for the summer, but give him a role. I mean, if he's
Mhm.
if you're sending him to the ECHL, then that's fine. Then that's your answer, and we know. But if not, give him a role, even if it's fourth line, penalty kill, all that. Hey, this is your role. You've got to play this to a T. That's what the Flyers need, is a guy like that in the future. So that's maybe the way to do it.
Yeah, and then the last guy who's the biggest mystery, I think, is Oscar Eklund, who they recently signed to a contract, and I think he's 25 years old, so it's a little bit older to be coming over from the Swedish league, but he has been playing at that top level in Sweden. Is he another Rhett Gardner? Possibly.
Well, I know the Flyers and the fans for sure are hoping that he'd be this net front presence guy. Now, if Michkov comes over, he's not getting a spot to start the season. Doesn't matter how well he plays in camp. And that's fine with me. Let him start out in the AHL, give him that bumper spot, let him be the net front guy, give him a top 9 role, and let's see what he can
Yep.
do. It's a
Yeah.
lot to expect him just to come into the NHL, even though he's had SHL experience. It's still a lot. So that's where I think he's at. And then, yeah, if for some reason, he's got like 5-10 goals early and the Flyers feel like he could help their power play, because like who couldn't? Then,
Right.
then maybe he gets a call up, and somebody else, there's a tough decision and somebody else goes down. Maybe if Delorier is still on the roster, then, he goes down for his final, curtain call, whatever. You worry about it then.
Yeah, I think so. But yeah, it's going to be a tough road for all of these guys trying to achieve enough to take that next step. And is there going to be room for them to do so if they achieve those goals? I
A
think
lot
that's
of
the big
questions. You got a lot
question.
of questions, Rachel.
Yeah, I do. And I think that the fact that there's so little movement contract wise with this team makes the questions harder to answer.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's why they have to have some really tough meetings. Once they know what's happening with Michkov, Kolosov will work itself out one way or the other. That's not a big worry. But Michkov can change a lot of things, even so much as, what they might be looking for in the draft, too.
Well, stay tuned because the conversation will continue at some point with the defensemen on this list. We haven't even talked about them yet. So, good times in the AHL for the Flyers upcoming. It is Monday, so we have a brand spanking new poll question for y'all to answer. Should be a lot of fun. Plus, our nemesis of the week coming up next.
Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need, the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers.
So one of the big pieces of news from over the weekend was the hiring of Craig Berube as the new coach of the Toronto Maple Leafs. It'd been sort of rumored for a couple of days, and then they
Yeah.
finally did it. They also, Carolina also extended Rod Brindamore. We kind of knew they didn't have
Well,
to worry
we were
about it,
thinking
but
they might, but I didn't think he'd get 5 years. So I just thought
yeah,
maybe there's somebody would outbid him. I thought there was a possibility of that.
yeah, for sure. But with all of that, there had been some sort of hopes, wishes, and dreams by some, not a ton of people, but by some, to get Craig Berube to come back to the Flyers in some capacity. He'd been hanging around a little bit, but it was not to be. But in a fantasy world where he did not sign with the Leafs, just which ex-Flyers coach would you want back to coach the Flyers? Craig Berube, Peter Laviolette, Dave Haxtell, or Ken Hitchcock?
Interesting list.
Yeah, so I think that it should be a fun one. Even if it's none of the above, want to know what your answer would be. And we'll put that poll up on YouTube as per usual. Put a link to it in the show notes. If you disagree with these options or you have comments about it, let us know there as well. For our nemesis of the week, last week I talked a lot about the draft permutations and picking 12. There were so many factors to take into consideration and potential picks from other teams. And so trying to suss out who might be available at 12 is an interesting challenge for the Flyers and for us at the same time. And this week for me, I think the nemesis has to be this Rangers versus Panthers series because I think that, obviously I want the Panthers to lose this series very badly so that the Flyers get a better draft pick. That's always the goal here.
You're
But in order
praying, you're hoping against hope, Rach. You know you are.
well, but here's the thing. In order for the Panthers to lose, the New York Rangers have to win, which is also terrible.
Uh-huh.
So there is no win situation here for me. And so that is why this upcoming series that starts Wednesday night is my nemesis of the week.
That's funny. My nemesis this week is Google Translate. I'm sick of every person, blogger, media person, fan, trying to translate what's been translated to figure out what's happening with Matvei Michkov or really anybody that ever comes over from Russia. The one thing you have to always be careful about is whatever is written in a Russian paper on a Russian website, yeah, you could translate it and it might be good information for like 3 hours. And then the next day you'll find out, oh, you know what? They've rescinded that statement, or, oh, you know what? That's not going to happen. It's not worth your effort. I'm telling you, it's not worth your time or effort to go deep into that and start writing about it and thinking about it from those quotes. Leave those quotes alone, man. I'm telling you, I've been down this road before and had sources tell me good things, seeing it written in black and white and watching it all change. And that's my nemesis of the week.
That's a good one. I live in a neighborhood that has a lot of Russian speakers. So if I ever need
There you go.
to know what something says, I might, contact somebody that lives in my building and figure it
Got a
out.
little
But
borscht belt there. Yeah.
yeah. All right. That will do it for today's show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back tomorrow to talk probably the defensemen in this situations and a lot more. As a reminder, we always want to hear from you. Send in your questions via Twitter at Locked On Flyers. You can email us at lockedonflyers@gmail.com or comment over on YouTube. I'm Rachel. I'm on Twitter at rmiriam. That's RMIRIAM.
I'm Russ. I'm at Sportsology, SPORTSOLOGY.
Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube that's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus national shows covering every league like Locked On NHL. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Have a great day, everyone.